So, continuing with this series of rewatching MCU movies, I came finally to rewatch Thor. Yes, and it's funny. I was pretty much in the camp that the Thor movies were kind of some of the weaker ones of the MCU, and I suppose when compared to Iron Man and Captain America, yeah, it holds the third place there, but I really liked it. I think I probably liked it more the second, or I've seen it before since, I'm sure, like on TV or something, but to take the time to, watch it again, it's pretty solid film. And for Chris Hemsworth, who was basically an unknown at the time, I forget what else he had done up to that point. The only thing I knew him other in was the Star Trek movie, and that's only a brief part. It's an important part, but it's very brief as Captain Kirk's father and all that. But in Thor, and he totally nails the character. It's fully fleshed out character here. He's got the lingo down, and the arrogance of him, and then later on, it's a credible performance of how he's humbled and humiliated by what he goes through to get his powers back, and a good breakout performance, and it's understandable why he's a major star now. And so good on him. And because going forward, Robert Downey Jr. was their first big star, and I'm sure they needed a star to initiate this whole thing, and it had to win that over and introduce people to it, despite the troubles Robert Downey Jr. had at the time. He owned the role and won it over and carried the universe into what it is. And Chris Evans was a little more known. He wasn't quite a bankable star on par with Robert Downey Jr., but Chris Hemsworth, like I said, was almost unknown, and yet he knocks it out of the park, and pretty much carries this movie. You had Natalie Portman, who was more of a major star than he was, and she does a good job here as his interest and plays a role well, and everybody does, really. Certainly Tim Hiddleston scheming as Loki, and you can't imagine anyone else playing the role, and Anthony Hopkins as Odin and all that. And but Hemsworth, it all lays on him. If he failed, then it wouldn't work. It didn't matter how many stars you had sharing the screen with you. So he did. And this is an interesting thing. So once again, the template revisited, where it's the arrogant man who has to be broken and come back. Here, I have to say that this was, like, I compared the Captain America video I did to Captain Marvel, and I pretty much made it a Captain America versus Captain Marvel video, and explaining that there was a lot of similarities between the two, just the basic plot structure and whatnot, and certain way the roles were played out, and how Captain America was far leaps and bounds better. And here you have something that they should have probably looked at for Captain Marvel, in that Thor is already, he's the god of thunder, he's got his powers and everything, and he's arrogant, he's full of himself, and he thinks he knows it all, and Odin's trying to rein him in and trying to tell him what he's supposed to do, and he needs to listen, and instead he goes off on his own and restarts an old war with the frost giants and all this sort of thing, and of course not realizing he's quietly being manipulated by his brother Loki, who wants the throne for himself. And so Thor needs to be taught a lesson, and that's the whole point of the movie. And so had Captain Marvel gone through something more serious like that, where you might endear some sympathies for her character, and that it's fine for her to be kind of arrogant and full of herself and her power, and then to be crushed and broken down and then come back. Sure, it sounds simple enough, but it garners that type of storyline, and again, it endears you, and you have to have some empathy for your hero, rather than basically her mind was wiped and she didn't know it. And they didn't even exploit that story, which they could have done, where you would have some sympathies for her about what she's lost. It's there, but it's not really fleshed out the way it should have been. And actually that does pay some amount of tribute to the comic book versions of her, at least the old ones. The new one, I don't even know what the hell. Who cares? But anyway, with Thor, this is one where it took quite a bit more liberties with the character as opposed to Iron Man and Captain America, which are pretty much in tune with their original origin stories, with a few changes for time and whatnot. But with Thor, Donald Blake, the doctor character that was his alias, is just pretty much removed here, and it's moved on since he's no longer a part of the Thor comics, and that's been a long time now. They pretty much did away with him, and there was a trend about secret identities were silly, and well, the whole superhero genre is silly. I mean, there's a lot you have to accept if you're going to get into these stories, and then to start nitpicking about something like that, it's like, well, what are you doing? But anyway, that's what happened to Donald Blake. In the original story, Donald Blake, he's vacationing in Norway when suddenly some aliens invade, and he runs to hide in a cave, and he finds this stick, and he learns that if you strike it, and if you're worthy, it'll turn into Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, and if you're worthy, you will have the power of Thor. And of course, there he is. He transforms into Thor. And from then on, it kind of suggested that this was sort of like Captain Marvel. I mean, Shazam, the real Captain Marvel, where somebody turns into this character. But later on, I think they retconned it to where, no, he was always Donald Blake. I'm not sure if that was retconned, if they did a story early on to explain this, but that Donald Blake was Thor. It's just Odin, again, wanting to teach Thor humility, that he was too arrogant and it caused trouble. So he sends him to Earth in the form of a lame mortal. Donald Blake needed a cane because one of his legs was lame. He didn't work right. And that was the form he was in. And I guess Odin just set it up magically that he's a doctor. He didn't have to go to school or anything. And so Donald Blake just thinks he's Dr. Donald Blake until he discovers the hammer and he's back to being Thor. But he keeps going back and forth between the two so that you had this typical comic book alias and an alter ego and whatnot. Well, that's too much crap to go through. So the movie gives certain amount of homage to it, in which they give him the name Donald Blake, and it's some former boyfriends of Jane Foster's. And so for a while, that's all that is, and then you move on from there. Because the Thor is the story, and not Donald Blake. Although throughout the decades of when they had made use of Donald Blake and the Avengers, Donald Blake was pretty much the house physician for the Avengers. And, well, I guess they'll just have to think of something else. I guess Jarvis the computer will do it for them. Whatever. So the story goes, and it sets up the whole story about Thor and his brother and their constant battle. And you have the credibility there, and there's enough scenes that grows this relationship, and you understand the jealousy between the two. But even, certainly Thor still loves Loki, and he's devastated when apparently Loki ends up disappearing into a warp or whatever in space. Well, we know better, don't we? But at the same time, there's a certain amount of feelings and whatnot from Loki, and of course that grows over time. And he said he does care about the man. Ultimately, he probably would not kill Thor, but he wants what Thor's got and everything. And then the sort of the heartbreak of the secrets of Loki, that he was a child of the Frost Giants and he was only adopted by Odin, so on and so forth. A whole, a soap opera from Asgard there, but it works perfectly, and it fits, and it gives motive and credibility to your characters far more than another movie. Yes, Captain Marvel. Just didn't really deliver that. The foundation was there, but they didn't really build on it quite like this one. So I'll get to Dark World eventually again, but this one I think was a fine film among the library of Marvel films. So good on Thor, directed by Kenneth Branagh, of course, and a great breakout performance for Chris Hemsworth. And when you see that, you understand why he's the major star. He is now probably the last great guest appearance on Saturday Night Live was the one he did, especially when they did that sketch about reality shows. Man, that's gold. So the guy's got some talent. Of course, he's a pretty boy. The ladies go nuts over this guy. They look at him, and he's there to represent white men like me. Yes, I look exactly like Chris Hemsworth. Representation. Get out of here. So, a great show, worth revisiting. And they kept it kind of simple. I mean, the main big elaborate scenes is Asgard, but when he's on Earth, it's just a small, out-of-the-way town where S.H.I.E.L.D.'s investigating the hammer and all that sort of stuff. Oh, and of course, lest I forget, you get your first look at Hawkeye, who briefly appears, but it's setting up their universe with that. And Hawkeye almost has to kill Thor, but it doesn't come to that, and we'll have to wait to see him again in, yes, the Avengers. All right, thank you for watching and listening. We'll do it again soon, and while you're here, why not like and subscribe? Yeah, sure. And for those of you who have subscribed, thank you very much. And also, don't forget to check out that link description below. That'll take you to my many stores that have plenty of goodies for you. Yes, my artwork on t-shirts, posters, stickers, mugs, hats. Oh, yeah, hats. And then, oh, yeah, you can head over to Nailsin Theater at sellfy.com/Nailsin, where my poor man Mystery Science Theater treatment to old sci-fi and horror movies is there. Yeah, it's like watching a movie with me, with my witty commentary, cartoon sound effects, inappropriate laugh tracks, and, on occasion, due to some amount of lack of talent, bathroom humor. Yeah. Oh, it's just so much fun.